of Emmett Till, A Candid Conversation. Just briefly, Emmett Lewis Till, a 14-year-old African-American boy, was born here in Chicago, July 25th, 1941. He was the only child of his parents, Mamie Till and Lewis Till. Unfortunately, Emmett never knew his father, who had been in World War II. His mother raised him single-handedly, and she worked really long hours. And so as a result of that, Emmett would take responsibilities around the house. Mamie Till Mobley recalls that Emmett had the home responsibility. She says, I remember everything was really on his shoulders and he took it upon himself. She says, he told me that if I work and I make the money, that he would take care of everything else. So he cleaned and he cooked and he did laundry for her. So in August of 1955, his great uncle, Moses Wright, comes up from Mississippi for a visit to take his cousin, Wheeler Parker, back to Mississippi for the summer. And of course, Emmett begs to go as well. He eventually was allowed to go. 3 days after arriving in Money, Mississippi, August 24th, 1955, Emmett Till and a group of other teens went to the grocery store after working in the cotton fields in the hot Mississippi sun. Scholars say that no one will ever really know what happened in that grocery store that day, but it is said that Till purchased bubble gum, and some of the children with him reported that he either whistled at the woman or flirted with her or touched her hand. Who was the woman? Carolyn Bryant, right? And she happened to be the clerk on duty that day and the wife of the owner of the store. 4 days later, at approximately 2:30 in the morning, August 28, 1955. Now, we're talking about 8 years before the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And we're talking about approximately 5 months before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. And we're also talking about almost 5 years before the students began to sit in, right, at the counters at North Carolina. Her husband and his half-brother, her husband was Roy Bryant and the half-brother was J.W. Milan. They kidnapped Emmett Till from his great uncle's home. They brutally beat him and dragged him to the banks of the Tallahatchie River. They shot him in the head, and then they tied him up with barbed wire and attached him to a huge fan and shoved his mutilated body into that river for fish to feed upon. After his mutilated body was located, it was then shipped to Chicago. His body was on display for 5 days. Mamie Till Mobley said that despite the enormous pain that it caused her to see her son's dead body on display, she opted for an open casket because, in her words, let the world see what has happened, because there is no way that I could describe this. She said, and I needed somebody to help me to tell what this was like. The men, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milan, were put on trial. They had a jury of their peers, all white men. That white jury deliberated for 1 hour and 7 minutes, 67 minutes. And despite the overwhelming evidence and the widespread plea for justice from outside of Mississippi on September 23rd, they acquitted Bryant and Milam. A few months later, Bryant and Milam admitted to this atrocity, to the brutal murder, the brutal assassination of Emmett Till. But they were protected by the double jeopardy laws. And so they were able to tell their whole story to a then very famous and popular magazine called Look. They made $4,000 for telling their truth that year. This is coming on the right after the Supreme Court landmark decision, Brown v. Board of Education. That decision deemed that racial segregation in public accommodation were unconstitutional. And so Emmett Till's death was so important that it was deemed the catalyst of the American Civil Rights Movement. Some folks call him the crown prince of the Civil Rights Movement. Noted scholar and activist, Dr. Clenora Hudson Weems, called Emmett Till the sacrificial lamb of the Civil Rights Movement. And to tie it all up, in 2007, 50 years after this atrocity, Carolyn Bryant, whose last name now is Dunham, who had claimed that he had harassed her, recanted parts of her accounts when she spoke to Timothy Tyson, who wrote a book and interviewed her. She said that Emmett Till never grabbed her. And she said, nothing that boy did could justify what happened to him. And so as a result of that admission, in 2008, the Justice Department opened a new inquiry in 2018, my apologies. In 2018, the Justice Department opened a new inquiry into the case. But then unfortunately, in 2021, the US Department of Justice closed the investigation, citing a lack of evidence. And so as a result of that, Ollie Gordon, who is the cousin of Emmett Till, said that the family had hoped a renewed investigation into the Black teenager's 1955 lynching in Mississippi would clear his name once and for all. And Mr. Gordon said, it leaves a hole in our hearts because we would like to see justice for him. And he goes on to say that we will continue to push for justice in Emmett Till's name. I just wanted to share that with everyone before we go ahead and start the conversation, honoring the memory, I keep the member, right? Remembering, right? Honoring the memory of Emmett Lewis Till, a candid conversation, okay? Mr. Rayner.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
We just want to ask the first question that came from our illustrious audience. What are your memories? What are your memories of the event, right? If you have any, what are your memories of the lynching of Emmett Till?
Well, as I explained to Ms. Purnell, I have to first say that was the year I was born.
Mm.
So all of my memories are from my grandfather and my uncles and my parents who were there at the time and who serviced the Mamie Till family. What was impressed upon us was the strength my grandfather had in an effort to make sure that Mrs. Till's wishes were held up and true. Of course, this also says that, I guess we're being recorded. Okay, I'm getting some messages on my screen. So the stories that I heard when I was growing up was that my grandfather was very strong and steadfast in making sure that Mrs. Till was able to do the things that she wanted to do. You know, obviously, in hindsight, there were a lot of things that happened that were out of our control. But one thing that was in our control was to make sure we served that family like we continue to do. And even though and one of the other questions was whether or not there were any threats. Yes, my grandfather did have death threats. We believed that our phones were tapped, that we were being surveillanced. But he still held strong and still maintained the necessary decorum so that Mrs. Till could have the funeral services she wanted for her son. Because of the circumstances and because of the situation, no one knew that it was going to turn out the way it did. Obviously, you're right. This was the catalyst of our struggles. This was the civil rights movement, the very beginning. I would concur with the other authors that you just mentioned and the educators. All of this happened prior to Rosa Parks. All of this happened prior to the lunch boycott, the bus boycott. So the things that happened were in fact a catalyst to what we're still experiencing today.
Thank you for saying that. You know, when I read that he bought bubble gum,
Yeah,
it reminded me of Trayvon Martin and the Skittles,
absolutely.
right? Walking in the gated community, right? Being told, you know, George Zimmerman being told, do not pursue.
Yes, yes.
And he
But
hunted.
he still did.
Right. He hunted him, right?
Yes,
he had to have prey that night. It reminded me of, you know, Laquan McDonald just walking, you know,
away.
kitty cornerly away, being
Away.
shot 16 times. Mike Brown, who had just walked out of the convenience store. Yeah, it reminded me of all of that. And I think, you know, during that period, you know, the African-American community had a small win in Montgomery, right?
Yeah,
with
right.
the bus boycott. But then with Brown v. Board, right? You get it kind of, the intent is to open up, right? But then they come back around and file an appeal where they're saying move with all deliberate speed, right? All deliberate speed. When you just hear it, you're thinking, okay, you know, move, you know, intentionally, let's get it done. All deliberate speed means, okay, let's take some syrup out into the 27-degree weather and let it sit out there and see how fast it moves, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
do not enforce, right, this. That's why it took, you know, from Emmett Till basically in 55 to 60 before we see any real forward movement in the civil rights movement, right?
And of course, and I don't want to cut you off, but remember too, society, you know, society back then kept a blind eye to what we were going through. You know, the African-American community in the North didn't necessarily, or the white community in the North didn't understand what was being done to Blacks in the South, you know, and it wasn't until this and the publicity that this received that it galvanized our community around the world. to look at the injustices. You know, they talk about the Constitution. Everybody's created equal. Everybody's created equal if they're white. You know, not everybody was created equal.
Right. And it, and just goes to show, when you say, this is was happening back then and it's happening now, it made me think about the importance of publicity, right? Those photos that really got out and showed, okay, look at this injustice, right? And so then people were able to get behind, those movements and make sure that public policy and laws were being changed to hopefully, affect change. But yeah, that force is required, right? For any forward movement in the African American community. Nothing has ever been just handed to us just because we were quote unquote fellow human beings.
Right. Those photos were the same thing as the McDonald tapes. It actually brought it right in front of you. You can't deny these pictures. A picture speaks 1,000 words. Those pictures spoke many more 1,000 words.
Yeah, and it also shows the forward thinking of Mamie Till when she says, you're going to open this coffin and let people see the ugly face, right, of hate crime.
Yeah, man's inhumanity to man.
Man's inhumanity to man. We're not going to go over there today.
Exactly.
You got that one? Okay, all right. So let's go on with the questions then. The question is, what was the discussion like within the community following funeral services for Emmett Till? Any information from the family on that?
Well, just that, I think a lot of people were still in shock. It took a while for people to really understand what was happening. When we look at some of the file footage of what Ms. Purnell showed, we hardly ever see that many people gathered for an occasion like this. But this was so many people that the white newspapers, not only the Defender, because the Defender was the only paper that was really getting a photographer and the story. And then after the pictures were circulated, you had the Daily News, you had the Tribune, you had the Sun-Times, you had all of the newspapers from around the country now being a part and bringing into this discussion. It had been kind of narrow focused at first, but then when these pictures got out, the whole world knew.
Yeah. So we need pictures on everything.
Everything. And that's why it's important that, we as a community take pictures, show our story. We have the technology now to film what we see so that it can be shown. The injustices that we see can be shared.
Right. Until the lion tells its own story, right? The
Correct.
hunter will always get the praise.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I was able to see just a bit of women of the movement just before we came on. And what I saw, it was very informative, a little, kind of sensationalist, right?
Well, that's Hollywood.
Right, so if some background story and you just see the movie, right, you might accept the movie as quote unquote truth.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So, but did your grandfather ever talk about how he felt while preparing Emmett Till's remains for the funeral?
Well, actually, he kept most of that stuff pretty private. When the incident happened, my grandfather had been in business for a few years. His sons, A.A. Rayner Jr. and John B. Rayner, joined the firm. They had just come back from the war. So he had two soldiers in his family who were going to watch his back. And they didn't care about the threats because those threats came from Mississippi. It wasn't likely that they were going to come up to Chicago and start anything, not with two soldiers just returning from the army, and one of them being a Tuskegee Airman as well. They weren't going to put up with any threats on their dad. You know, they welcome the opportunity to protect him. You know.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and I think about you know, what that must have been like to have to prepare you know, Emmett Till's mutilated body, because there was a lot going on. I mean, like I said earlier, you know, the fish had feeded on him, you know, and so yeah, that was really
yeah, the decomposition that was shown was had been treated compared to what they originally received. You know, they had to work on it just to get clothing on him, because he wasn't shipped up here with clothing. You know, he was shipped up here wrapped in a sheet, in a what's called a railroad container. And one of the pictures that was presented shows that cart, or that railroad box, which is how it got from Mississippi to Chicago. And that box was, you know, just a box.
not refrigerated.
No.
Whoa.
No.
Oh, that is powerful information right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Whoa.
So one of the things that he tried to do was obviously to retard the odor. The odor was just terrible. And part of what we do is to treat some of that decomposition so that we can at least slow it down. We can't stop it, but at least slow it down until the visitation, until the services, until the interment.
Wow, wow, that is really, really amazing. You had mentioned that there were you know, threats against your family, and that also the family was being surveilled, right? How did your family deal with that, right? The death threats, or did they talk about that, you know, the surveillance, right? And also going along with Mamie Till's desire to have an open casket?
Well, you know, the whole point of it was just to be intimidated, and folks up here weren't being intimidated by folks down in Mississippi. It just wasn't going to happen. They weren't here. They couldn't do anything, you know. And of course, up here, there were more people who were willing to be security. I mean, the Chicago police, after everything came up here, there was a lot of security. So it wasn't likely that something was going to jump off, because there was too much publicity.
Okay. And then, you know, you mentioned the World War II vets, right?
Yeah.
The Tuskegee Airmen, you know, these guys were coming back from overseas with an understanding of what freedom could possibly be.
Yes.
Right. And so,
and
yeah,
they recognized racism too, and they weren't going to put up with it up here in the North anymore. You know, that's when we started, you know, not just, you know, those, you know, standing up for ourselves. You know, and there were a lot of Black people in the Chicago metropolitan area who were united. I mean, you know, our Black community back then was very tight. You know, much tighter than it is now.
Because people like you said, people were tight. They understood community, right? That you know, I am not just my brother's keeper, I am my brother.
Yes, right.
Right. There were organizations, you know, people would come together as organized entities to work for the best, right, interest of the community.
Correct.
Okay? Right.
Correct.
Yeah, and so you see a lot of those veterans coming back from World War II, you know, creating you know, unions, and, you know, and trying to join unions and fight for equal employment and equal housing, because even during that time, you know, they had the GI Bill, but the GI Bill was set up for, you know, the white GI, right? The European American GI, not the Black GI. So the Black GIs had to then fight right? To get what was on the books that was supposed to be available to them
For
to
them.
use.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. A.A. Rayner and Sons can be described as an early catalyst for change, bravery, leadership within the Black community. What words of encouragement do you have for our future generations of young men and women?
Well, from my desk, I'd have to say that we have to come together much more than we are. The Black on Black crime that we see on a daily basis, the shootings, the gang violence, is just heartbreaking. At times, when I'm making arrangements with families and I hear the stories of how someone may have gotten hurt or killed in the streets, we're just 50 years from what happened to Emmett, and here we are doing this to ourselves. It's so discouraging. We should be each other's keepers and watching out for each other, because what we've come from to where we are now, we've struggled our entire history. We've come from kings and queens,
Mhm.
And here we are killing each other. It doesn't make sense. And most times, if we sit around and talk to one another, we came from the same neck of the woods.
Yeah.
We came from Georgia, we came from Alabama, we came from Mississippi. And we're 4 generations from being relatives of each other,
Yeah.
So why are we taking each other out? It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
I'm heartbroken about the number of kids that I see coming through the funeral home who have
Yes.
been shot as innocent bystanders.
Yes.
It's just so heartbreaking. And I would encourage the students that are listening, pay attention to your history so you'll know where you came from, so that you know where you don't want to go. The prison system is set up for us, and all we're doing inside of it is just retaliation, retaliation, retaliation. We should be trying to build each other up and build our communities, and we're tearing them down one by one. It's just sad.
That is so true. The first thing you said is that, we need to come together, right? And so we could look at that from the standpoint of, what do we have in common? We'll say you and I, Mr. Childs, what do we have in common? And we decide that thing that we have in common, that's what we can work for, right? And if we encounter other folks who have that same thing in common, they might want to work with us. So we have to start where we are when we come together, because sometimes even within our own bloodline, people may not want to work with us, but we know that we're still in a struggle. And hey, if we have economic issues that we can work on, right, that we're willing to work on, let's work on those economic issues, right?
Absolutely.
Let's find a way to turn what they call Black on Black crime into Black on Black love and respect.
And success.
Right? And success.
Yeah, because
let's do that. And what does success look like, right?
Yeah,
Make
absolutely.
it work for you.
What we have in common is our history. We are of the same cloth. We may have a different shade, but we're the same.
That's right.
We're all the same.
Right. So, and I liked when you said we're kings and kings. So how do you degenerate from kings and queens, right? You said we degenerate from kings and queens because we don't know our history.
That's right.
Right. And
right.
And Malcolm X said something to the effect of all our studies, it is history that best rewards all of our research.
That's right.
And in Africana studies, we use an Akan word, right? That's called Sankofa, right? And Sankofa literally means return to the source, right? Why are you returning to the source? Because there's information back there.
Correct.
Right? that will help us to move effectively into the future. Sankofa, we need that, right?
Yeah.
Just like you're saying, okay? We definitely need to talk to one another. We definitely need to talk to one another. We might cut our eyes at what are you looking at or whatever. But if we can begin a conversation that is affirming, that is self-affirming, culturally affirming, right? Then we can move towards that success that you talk about. And then you said we need to pay attention, right, to our history, Sankofa, so that we'll know where we don't want to go. Because if we
Exactly.
know where we don't want to go, then we flip that script, we know exactly where we want to go, and we can get there, right?
Surely.
From
Surely.
sheer desire followed by hard work, what they call sweat equity,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Okay. Let's see. There have been, just like you mentioned, several tragedies within the Black community that are compared to the likes of Emmett Till. Some of them we mentioned. And it is written that often Blacks act out in ways that do not result in positive change, such as looting, right? What do you think would be the most effective course of action when injustices happen within the Black community? That's going to be a good one.
Well, you mentioned Laquan McDonald and Jason Van Dyke as an example. We protesting Jason Van Dyke getting out of jail early. Can't blame him because he's got smart lawyers. What we should be blaming is the judge that gave him the light sentence in the first place. And how do we do that? We vote. We vote that judge off the bench. You know, we gather ourselves as a community and put people in positions who are going to be helpful to us, not disrespectful to us. We talked about the things that have happened over the past summer or the last couple of years with the looting. We damaged more stores in our community, and then we didn't have stores to go to after we finished. We couldn't go get paper towels or toilet paper or food. Our grandparents couldn't go to the stores that are local because we damaged them all. Why would we damage the stores that tomorrow we got to go to shop in? For a temporary fix, a temporary blow off of steam. It doesn't help us as a community. We've got to do things better than that. You know, the judge that sentenced Van Dyke to jail eventually has to come up for renewal. He gets voted back into the bench. He's not appointed. Well, he might have been appointed first, but he has to go through the process. We should know that as communities. Students in higher education, higher learning facilities like colleges should be networking with each other. Okay, listen, let's protest the judge who was on the bench. Let's make sure he doesn't get reelected. If there's a politician who does something, just like our famous president, Trump, you know, there's no reason for him to be back in office. He tried to lead a mob and storm the Capitol building. You know, all of the people that support him have to come up for reelection. They should never have an opportunity to be reelected. You know, those are the types of things that colleges across the country, you know, your professors like you, Dr. Franklin, should be telling these kids or organizing these kids to let's do something that's going to benefit us. Let's make sure these elections, because right now the Republicans are putting judges in positions so that they rule. You talk about Roe versus Wade. We're going to talk about civil rights. those types of things. How can anybody who is an elected official say we can't support human rights and what John Lewis voting rights should look like? You know, that's the kind of good trouble we should be getting into. You know,
Yes.
making sure these elected officials are held to the fire by us.
Yeah, that is very, very key. So blame the judges, right? And so that means that even if we don't vote for the president of the United States, we need to vote locally.
That's right.
Right. But we
Yeah.
need to vote locally as a voting bloc. And then once we do that as a voting bloc, then we can begin to push, right? So for some real justice on the national level, right?
Absolutely.
So if we don't like our older person, if that all not just not liking the older person, but if the older person is not working in our community's best interest,
Absolutely.
we need to vote that person out of there.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. And then we need to, when we vote someone in, we must vote someone in that we know, number one, if they have our best interest in heart. And then number two, if we can make them have our best interest in heart, because that's the ultimate thing. Right. Yeah. It's not, oh, I like Miss or Mr. So-and-so, they should be the alder person or mayor or state's attorney. No. Right.
Right.
Do they have our communities, not my personal, our community's best interest?
That's right.
Right.
That's absolutely
not only
right.
In their heart, but in their actions. And again, if they don't, we're going to make them.
Yeah.
Right?
Or vote them out.
Or vote them the heck up out of there. Yeah, these are key factors. And we're talking voting locally. Blame the judge, right?
Yeah.
Because there were 16 counts.
Yeah, he gave
against him.
How did he get a 7-year sentence? He should have been sentenced to life in prison.
And then out for good behavior, quote unquote.
Yeah, he took a life, and he wouldn't be in prison if it wasn't that video. The video showed it. That's why he got convicted. Had he not been convicted, okay, we'll give him a sentence that's, representative of what he did. He took a young Black boy's life, cold-blooded.
Right. And so I look at that, good behavior. Which one was good behavior? His behavior in prison, right? Please. Or what he did on that street that night.
Well, he was probably in solitary confinement. So he didn't, what was he going to do in prison?
Exactly.
He's locked up 23 hours a day. Exactly. What trouble can he get into?
Exactly.
Yeah. How many young black men don't get released from because of good behavior?
Look, we have so many of them sitting over in Cook County, right? Nonviolent drug offenses.
Haven't even been in the system, haven't even been tried. No decision has been made. They're just sitting there waiting.
Exactly.
And what do they do while they're waiting? They get in trouble. So then they've got an additional charge on the charges that they're being faced with.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so again, you said we need to come together now.
Come together.
We got to have a conversation.
Fraternities, sororities, professors, let's get together and expose these judges that do us no good.
Right. And do what is in the best interest of our community. We've got to do it because it's, a young man wrote a book, M.K. Asante wrote a book called It's Bigger Than Hip Hop, right? It's bigger than me.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying? The community is bigger than me because, I can live by myself. Okay. But not really.
No.
Okay. Because if the community is not being assisted, if I'm driving down the street, like what's happening now, you get shot in the head, you're done.
Yeah.
Right. So, come together. And then you talked about the fact that we need to think before we act with the looting. Sit down and think about it. It's not just you sitting there stomping your hands and I gotta do something. No. Take some breaths, calm down, get a piece of paper. What are we going to do? And then we have to get to the point where we cease being reactionary.
Correct.
At some point, we have to become the leader, right? For what is in the best interest of our community. Thinking is so fundamental.
Absolutely.
Thinking, right? And thinking rationally and thinking critically. This is, am I important, right? I am important. I am important. I am not nobody. I am somebody. I was born somebody.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And then you said, do something. Basically, this is what we've been saying. Do something that will benefit us all. Do something.
Yes. Just do it.
Just do it. The old Nike commercial, right?
Yep.
Just do it. Is it going to benefit us as a community? Think about it, rationalize, strategize, right?
Exactly.
Apply.
Yes, right.
The best interest of us. Okay, we stayed there for a while. Let's move. Okay, because you address, what will be an effective action for these injustices, right? And you've said that, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to hit that again because it's so important. Come together, vote locally. If a judge is anti-Black, right, then you got to get you another judge in there.
That's right.
And if then you got to make sure you got to hold their feet to the fire, right? Because that's what Africana Studies is all about, saying, look, the community is not separate from the university or the college, right?
No, it should be a part of.
Should be a part of, right? And so don't get to thinking, new judge, that you're not accountable to us, because we're going to come and hold your feet to the fire. Okay. Absolutely. Right? You are going to do what is in the best interest of our community. You see that we're being decimated here, right? We're not going to allow you to continue to do that. You either do what is for us or we will get you out. Again, come together, think before you act, and do something that will benefit us all, right? Don't just get, all hyped up, all emotional. We need our emotions. They're very important, but they should not be the first thing, right? True. We take those breaths, we calm ourselves, right? Think, right? Strategize, and then act. I just want to reiterate that because that was so powerful, Mr. Rayner. It was so powerful. I sure do appreciate you for that.
An elected official cares about one thing: re-election. Between those times is when the feet have to be held to the fire. They care about re-election. Support me when it comes to re-election. Okay, support me during your elected period of time. That's what we should be doing. Exactly. Hold them to the fire. If not, we're going to replace you. It goes from the alderman to the mayor to the governor to senators, congressional leaders, all of them. Yeah.
Right. Because, no elected official should have a lifetime appointment.
Never.
Especially if they're not working in the best interest of the community that sent them there.
That's why they think time limits is a term limits are a best thing, because why put somebody in office for 50 years and they don't do anything but just get reelected? Exactly. All they're doing is becoming, rich off of us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let me see. You know what I forgot? We were supposed to show clips. I got to talking. I didn't look at my schedule.
All right.
Ms. Purnell, are we okay? I apologize. We did not, I was just interviewing.
We are fine. It's going great. If you wanted to ask another question or you want to show the clip now, either one is fine with me.
Okay, let's show a clip and then yeah, that might end us up. But thank you so much, Mr. Charles.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Rayner, I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Jackson.
You're asking me to spend the rest of my life wondering if my child is in that box.
When Mr. Nelson agreed to prepare Emmett's body, he did so with the understanding that the casket would never be opened.
He did this under whose authority?
His own. Mr. Nelson put himself and everyone down there at risk when he defied sheriff's order.
Put him with the water.
Because of him, as far as they're concerned, Emmett's buried in your uncle's churchyard.
Until now, you saw those cameras.
I won't let them cover this up. I won't do it.
He sealed that casket to protect everyone involved, including you. I just don't think this is something a mother could handle.
I didn't think I could handle a lot of things in my life, Mr. Rayner, but I handled them. And I will handle this.
What?
I am not leaving until I see my boy.
We're ready.
Maestro. Un pollito, maestro. Un pollo. ¿Es hora del almuerzo?
I don't see any video. It's all black.
Someone speaking, could you mute somebody speaking Spanish in the back?
De volada,
Please
carnal.
mute.
Coma mierda. ¿Qué hora de almuerzo, señora? Dentro de media hora. Sí, que están en el almuerzo.
Ms. Purnell?
Sorry.
Thank you. Please
No.
mute. Please
Uh-huh.
mute. Okay, the screen is all
Angels got
black.
me here and they telling me I gotta give you up. Uh-oh, I know.
Okay, so maybe that's, we're just supposed to hear the audio. Ms. Purnell? Oh, well,
I'm here. You're unable to see the video?
right, it was, the screen was all black and I'm just wondering,
Let me
I
try to
don't
share it
think
again.
so.
Let me share it again.
No.
and so Ms. Blanco is saying it's available on Hulu. Is Hulu for free? Because I had to pay money for my clip.
Can you see the screen?
I see black. I see something like eHarmony something.
Wait a minute.
I see, you know, the caption.
Hold on.
And you know what? And we do have, we have one more question. And, you know, even if we can't see the video, you know, that might be okay, because, you know, we're
Go ahead.
talking, yeah, we're talking about Emmett Till as the sacrificial lamb and the catalyst for the civil rights movement. And our conversation has really been about both because they are one, right? And so the video, was going to be very informative, I know, but just to keep us within the time frame, our final question is related to Carolyn Bryant Dunham, because she went on to divorce Roy Bryant and to marry a Mr. Dunham or Donham, whatever. She, was the accuser of Emmett Till. And, I think she's made her transition now. If not, she's in her late 80s. She admitted in 2007, right, years after his murder, that, of course, like I read, that he had done nothing that legitimized what happened to him. So what are your thoughts surrounding a pursuit of justice, despite, her age or the amount of time that has passed?
Well, she certainly should have been held accountable. Obviously, she lied. She lied to the FBI. That's when you lie to the FBI, you should go to jail. They've been lying to white folks, been lying to the FBI since the beginning of time. She should have been held accountable. I think that's part of the reasons why Robert Mueller, who was in charge of the FBI, director of the FBI, when they disinterred Emmett's body, was to try to see if they could get some additional DNA from the remains. Since our technology has changed over the last 50 years, they were trying to get samples that they weren't able to do because it was so degraded. And after being interred for 50 years, they hoped they would possibly find some specimens or some samples that they could get some DNA from. I don't believe it was successful. I would be curious to see the pictures that they took when they brought Emmett out of the ground. Unfortunately, no one was able to do that other than them. The medical examiner may have had some pictures. I'm sure they're sealed, as well as what the FBI may have done with the tissues or the sampling that they did when they disinterred Emmett's body. It's interesting that it was Robert Mueller, who was the same person who was after Donald Trump, was still trying to find some kind of evidence to pin on them. But you're right. Roy Bryant and J.W. Millen, they admitted that they did it. They admitted it to the magazine that they did it because they knew they couldn't be charged. So as we all believe, God will take care of them.
Yeah, I just kept thinking about that, but they made $4,000.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like Emmett
Blood
Till's
money.
life was only worth $4,000.
Blood money. Yeah.
Yeah, blood money. And what I appreciate is the fact that the family of Emmett Till is still seeking and fighting for justice in his name, because Emmett Till, although he was a bit of a prankster, he was probably cocky coming from Chicago, right? And even if he wasn't cocky, he may have appeared to be cocky in Mississippi.
Yeah, it's still a child.
He's still a child. But even now recently, there was some research done where they said, the average, white person sees the average Black child, even beginning at 2 years old, as a grown person.
As a threat.
As a threat, and always, a sexual threat, thus being called predators, even to this day, right?
Yeah.
And then the family wants to clear his name because he didn't do anything, right?
He didn't. He didn't.
Right. He looked the white woman squarely in her eyes and maybe he smiled at her or, something like that. Or, maybe he didn't put his nickel down on the counter. You see what I'm saying? Or she went to grab it and maybe he grabbed it and, maybe touched her hand, but she said, look, he didn't even touch me.
He didn't do
Right?
anything to deserve being killed.
Didn't do anything that deserved being killed. Is there anything else that you would like to say to our student body that, in addition to what you've already said, or something that you might want to reiterate to our student body as far as, justice and just the Black community in general during this Black History Month?
Just come together as a group. I think that from our aspect and from what we see, we know that too often and too many times we disrespect each other, and it turns into a hostile environment. We don't have to be hostile to one another. All we have to do is talk to each other. We're of the same. We're all the same. As I said earlier, we may have a different hue, but believe me, we're all the same. We share the same history. We share the same struggles. We probably share bloodlines if you go far enough away. We've all come from the same area, probably the same continent anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
look
Go
out
ahead.
for each other and stop thinking that we're each other's enemy. We're not each other's enemy. We could be
Yes.
each other's future.
That's so true. Now, would you mind staying around a couple minutes for a couple of questions since I've messed up the schedule?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, Ms. Purnell, we're gonna open the floor for a couple of questions, and we just ask if our audience will not do commentary or dissertations, we just, ask a question, please. And raise your hand if you want to ask. And could you usher them in if they raise their hand, Ms. Purnell?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, no hands. All right. So I hope that, it is our hope that that our students have gained greater insight into the lynching of Emmett Till. Feel free to do further research. Several books have been written on Emmett Till and the cutting short of his very young life. Make it a point to go and read about, this catalyst, not only of the civil rights movement, but of America examining itself, right? A lot of information is out there for you. Some we may not have for another generation or so, but make it a point of getting that information. There's nothing more important than research. William Leo Hansberry said, he was Lorraine Hansberry's great uncle, I think, or uncle. And he said, research, 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 right? And literally that means what? Search and search again and keep doing it, right? Because we want to be lifelong learners. I hope that you have appreciated honoring the memory of Emmett Till, a candid conversation. We appreciate so many of you being here. Although you did not ask a question, it's okay. That means that you got enough out of it that will take you to the library or to the database, right? Where you can fill in whatever blanks that you might have. It has been, my honor to speak with, Mr. Charles. It has been my honor to be with you here today. I want to thank you. Keep coming back. This
Thank
is
you.
Black History Month, right?
Thank
Created
you.
by Carter G. Woodson,
That's
right?
it.
Right here in Chicago,
That's
1926, right? So thank you so much. You're a wealth of knowledge, right,
Well,
Mr.
thank you.
Charles?
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Ms. Purnell, did you want to say anything before?
I just want to thank you all so much for this. This was very needful. I do encourage you all to check out the limited series. It is available on Hulu. If you have on demand, you can see it through ABC, through your on demand. If you have T-Mobile or Sprint, Hulu is free. It comes with your phone package, no matter what your package is. And then also I put in the chat our upcoming events for Black History Month. And I also placed our book and film list that is suggested for the month of February, Black History Month. So please feel free to check those out. And join us again. We have several other programs lined up for Black History Month, and they will all be online. So check your emails. I'll make sure that I send it through there. Thank you all so much, and happy Black History Month.
Yeah, thanks
Ms.
again,
Purnell,
Mr. Charles. Really appreciate it.
I was going to ask her to please send me a copy of her recording.
Absolutely.